A love tested by truth and deception. Helen sat in her room, her mind a storm of emotions. The weight of Frank's deception pressed heavily on her chest. She had spent days preparing herself for a life of sacrifice and care, believing she would be a pillar of support for a blind man she had grown to love. She had read articles, watched videos, and even imagined the little changes she would make in her daily routine to accommodate him. But now all of that felt like a cruel joke. How could he lie to her like this? She buried her face in her hands, frustration mixing with confusion. Her heart still yearned for him, but she couldn't ignore the sting of betrayal. Was she a fool for trusting him? Was his love even real? Or was it just another part of his elaborate test? The gentle knock on her door startled her. "Helen, please eat something. You've been in there all day." Her mother's voice was laced with concern. Helen swallowed the lump in her throat but didn't answer. She couldn't even summon the strength to speak. Her mother knocked again, more insistently this time. "Helen, you can't keep shutting yourself away like this. You need to talk." Helen clenched her fists. Talking wouldn't change anything, but she also knew she couldn't hide forever. She dragged herself to the door and unlocked it, letting her mother in. As soon as she stepped out, her mother's eyes scanned her face, filled with worry. Helen's usually radiant complexion looked dull, and her eyes were red-rimmed from hours of silent tears. "Sit," her mother said, guiding her toward the dining table. Helen sat, but the plate of food before her remained untouched. She picked at the edge of her napkin, avoiding eye contact. "I just don't know what to think anymore, Mum," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He lied to me. How can I trust someone who starts a relationship with deception?" Her mother sighed, taking her daughter's hand in hers. "I understand how hurt you feel, but before you throw everything away, have you considered why he did it? Maybe he had a reason beyond just wanting to deceive you." Helen looked up sharply. "A reason? What kind of reason justifies playing with someone's emotions?" Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not saying you should ignore what he did. I'm saying you need to understand it. If your heart is this troubled, maybe you shouldn't make a decision just yet. Talk to someone who can help you make sense of this before you let anger cloud your judgment." Helen sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of uncertainty. Deep down, she knew her mother was right. There was only one person she could turn to, Mama Agnes, her longtime mentor and trusted advisor. A mentor's wisdom. The next morning, Helen woke up feeling restless. The conversation with her mother had lingered in her mind all night. Despite her pain, a part of her longed for clarity. She needed answers, and she knew exactly who could help her find them. Mama Agnes. Mama Agnes was more than just a mentor. She was like a second mother, a wise woman in her 60s who had seen the world in all its shades of love and betrayal. From the time Helen was a teenager, Mama Agnes had been there, offering wisdom when life became too confusing. Helen took a deep breath and made her way to the elderly woman's home. The familiar sight of the small, cozy house, with its well-kept garden and wooden rocking chair on the porch, instantly brought a sense of comfort. Mama Agnes was already outside, knitting a colorful scarf, her keen eyes observing Helen as she approached. "Ah, my dear child," Mama Agnes said warmly, setting her knitting aside. "Come, sit. I can see the burden in your eyes." Helen sat beside her on the porch, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. Without hesitation, she poured out her heart. Helen's story. "Mama, I don't even know where to begin," Helen started, rubbing her palms together. "I met Frank through Auntie Mary. He presented himself as a blind man, and I believed him." Mama Agnes nodded but remained silent, allowing Helen to continue. "I felt sorry for him at first, but then something changed. I started falling for him, not because of his condition, but because of the man he was. Kind, intelligent, patient. I was already thinking about how to care for him, how to adjust my life to support him, and then..." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. Then I found out it was all a lie. He isn't blind. He never was. Mama Agnes sighed, taking Helen's hand in her own. And now your heart is torn between love and betrayal. Helen nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. How do I trust him again, Mama? He started this whole thing with deception. What kind of foundation is that for a relationship? Mama Agnes's wisdom. Mama Agnes patted Helen's hand gently. My child, love is never simple. It is filled with tests, misunderstandings, and even pain. The question you must ask yourself is not just why he lied, but what he truly feels for you. Helen remained silent, absorbing the words. Mama Agnes continued, her eyes distant, as if recalling an old memory. Many years ago, there was a young woman in this very neighborhood, a dear friend of mine. She fell in love with a man who told her he was just a simple carpenter. They struggled, built a life together, and had children. It wasn't until years later that she discovered he was actually a wealthy man who had wanted to find a woman who would love him for who he was, not for what he had. Do you know what happened? Helen shook her head. She was angry at first, just like you. She felt betrayed. But when she looked back at their years together, the love, the struggles, the way he had cared for her, she realized that his deception had been born out of fear. Fear that she wouldn't see him, only his wealth. Helen exhaled deeply. So you're saying I should just accept what Frank did? Mama Agnes chuckled. No, my child. I am saying you should understand it. If Frank had come to you as a rich businessman, would you have trusted his intentions? Helen hesitated. Truthfully, she wasn't sure. The world is full of deceit, Helen, but I have lived long enough to know when a man is sincere. Frank may have made a mistake, but did he hurt you? Did he mistreat you? Helen shook her head. No, he was always kind. Then the question is, do you love him enough to find out the full truth before you walk away? Or will you let pride push you from something real? Helen sat in silence, Mama Agnes's words sinking in. Her heart was still wounded, but doubt was creeping in. What if she was making a mistake by walking away? As she stood up to leave, Mama Agnes touched her arm gently. Think about it, child. Love is never perfect. It is what we make of it. Helen left deep in thought, her emotions still in turmoil. But one thing was certain. Mama Agnes's words had planted a seed of doubt in her decision to shut Frank out completely. Could she truly trust him again? Frank's uncle and a long-lost connection, a burdened heart in Switzerland. In the heart of Switzerland, in a spacious office lined with bookshelves and decorated with African artifacts, Pa Kamara sat reviewing business reports. He was a man of wisdom and influence, a strong presence in both the business world and his family. Though in his late 60s, his mind remained sharp, and his advice was sought by many, including his beloved nephew, Frank Kamara. As he sipped his evening tea, his phone rang. The name on the screen made him smile. It was Frank. Ah, my boy, he answered. How is Freetown treating you? Frank sighed deeply. Uncle, I've messed up. Pa Kamara frowned. Tell me everything. Frank's story. Frank leaned back in his hotel chair, staring out at the Freetown skyline. He felt overwhelmed, torn between his love for Helen and the consequences of his deception. I met a woman, Uncle, Frank began, his voice filled with emotion. Helen Cole. She's different. Strong, kind, hardworking. I thought I'd finally found someone genuine, someone who would love me for me, not for my money. Pa Kamara nodded, already understanding. So, what happened? Frank hesitated before continuing. I disguised myself as a blind man to test her sincerity. I needed to be sure she wasn't after my wealth. And she proved herself, Uncle. She cared for me, defended me, and he exhaled. I fell in love with her. But, Pacamara prompted, but now she's angry, hurt. She feels betrayed. She refuses to see me, and I don't know how to fix it. There was silence for a moment before Pacamara spoke. His voice was firm but kind. Frank, love is not a business deal. You cannot measure sincerity by creating deception, but you are not the first man to make a mistake. The real question is, what are you going to do now? Frank's jaw tightened. I want to fight for her. I want to make things right. Then you must go back, face her, earn her trust, prove to her that what you feel is real. Frank took a deep breath. You're right, Uncle. I'll go back to Freetown. But he hesitated. There's something else. Pacamara raised an eyebrow. What is it? A long-lost connection. Frank sat up, suddenly remembering something. Uncle, you once told me that sometimes fate connects people in unexpected ways. Well, Helen's last name is Cole. There was silence on the other end. Her full name is Helen Cole, Frank repeated. Pacamara's hands stiffened around his teacup. His heart pounded as memories from decades ago resurfaced. What was her father's name? He asked carefully. Samuel Cole, Frank replied, but he passed away years ago. The cup nearly slipped from Pacamara's grasp. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Samuel Cole. Could it really be the same man? Frank, Pacamara said slowly, do you know what this means? Frank frowned. What? Pacamara exhaled deeply. 20 years ago, I was working for a major corporation. I was a rising star, trusted by my employers, until someone framed me for theft. A powerful man wanted me gone. The evidence was stacked against me, and I was days away from losing everything. My job, my reputation, my future. Frank listened in silence, his pulse quickening. There was only one man who believed in me, Pacamara continued. He stood up for me when no one else would. He investigated, uncovered the real culprit, and cleared my name. That man was Samuel Cole. Frank's breath hitched. Are you saying? Pacamara nodded. Your Helen's father gave me my career, my stability, my life. If not for him, I don't know where I'd be today. Frank was speechless. This wasn't just a love story, it was destiny. It seems, Pacamara said with a knowing smile, that fate has brought you to the daughter of the man who once saved me. Frank swallowed, his heart pounding. Uncle, this is incredible. Pacamara's voice grew firm. It is, and I will do everything in my power to help you win her back. Frank's eyes burned with renewed determination. He had to make things right, not just for himself, but to honor the legacy of the man who had shaped his uncle's life. Then I'm going back, Frank said with certainty. I won't give up on her. Pacamara chuckled. That's the spirit. But before you go, let me tell you a few stories that might help you understand love and forgiveness better. Wisdom from experience. Pacamara leaned back, stroking his beard as he recalled another tale. Many years ago, I knew a man who fell in love with a woman from a different background. His family disapproved, and he was torn between love and obligation. Do you know what he did? Frank shook his head. He chose love. He fought against the odds, and today, they have been married for 30 years. Pacamara smiled. But it was not easy. He had to prove himself over and over again. And that is what you must do, my boy. Helen may be angry now, but if your love is true, it will stand the test of time. Frank nodded, feeling inspired. I understand, Uncle. I won't take no for an answer. Pacamara gave a satisfied nod. Good. Now go and fight for the woman you love. And when you see her mother, remind her of the great man her husband was. Frank smiled. I will. Thank you, Uncle. As he ended the call, Frank felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. This wasn't just about him and Helen anymore. This was about fate, about honoring the past, and about fighting for the future. and he was ready. Linda's deception and dark past. A woman scorned, as Helen wrestled with her emotions, Linda was already at work, determined to destroy any chance of reconciliation between Helen and Frank. Bitterness fueled her actions, and the more she thought about Frank moving on, the more determined she became to stop it. Linda wasn't just an ex-girlfriend. She was a woman who had lost her golden opportunity. A year ago, she had been on the verge of becoming Mrs. Kamara. Frank had adored her, or at least he had thought he did. He had showered her with gifts, taken her on luxury vacations, and even paid her rent for over a year. He had spoken of opening a business for her, something she claimed was her dream. But Linda had never been satisfied. She had always wanted more. More money, more jewelry, more control. Every time Frank fulfilled one of her desires, she found another demand, another way to manipulate him. But Linda's greed had no limits. Frank had started noticing small things: mysterious phone calls, sudden disappearances, expensive gifts she couldn't afford on her own. One evening, while waiting outside her apartment, he saw another man drop her off in a car he didn't recognize. She had kissed the man on the cheek before heading inside. That was the night Frank finally confronted her. The confrontation. Frank had waited in the apartment, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When Linda walked in, she froze. "Frank!" she exclaimed, her smile faltering. "What are you doing here?" He held up receipts, bank statements, and messages from a friend who had warned him about her lies. "Who is he, Linda?" Frank asked, his voice dangerously calm. Linda's eyes darted to the side. I don't know what you're talking about." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't lie to me. I know everything. The fake financial struggles, the sob stories, the secret meetings. You played me." Her expression hardened. "And what if I did?" she shot back. "What's love without money, Frank?" Frank had never felt more disgusted in his life. "You never loved me," he said, stepping back. "You loved what I could give you." Linda smirked. "And you were willing to give it." That was the last time Frank saw her, until now. A plan of revenge. When Linda found out about Helen, something inside her snapped. Frank had replaced her, and not just with any woman, with someone who didn't even have to beg for his love. She couldn't allow it. Sitting in her apartment, she picked up her phone and dialed Helen's number. The moment Helen answered, Linda's voice was filled with fake concern. "Helen, hey, it's been a while." Helen, still lost in her emotions, hesitated. "Linda, yes, I saw you coming out of Auntie Mary's office, and you looked upset. I had to call you." Helen sighed. It's complicated." Linda's lips curled into a smile. "Perfect. Helen, I need to tell you something. It's about Frank." Helen's grip on the phone tightened. "What about him?" Linda lowered her voice, adding a touch of sadness to make it sound real. "He's not who you think he is. Helen, I've been there. He's a deceiver. Do you know how many women he's tricked?" Helen's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Linda sighed dramatically. "I was one of them. He made me believe he loved me, made all these promises, and then he disappeared. He left me broken, Helen. I don't want the same thing to happen to you." Helen's mind raced. Could this be true? Had Frank done this before? She had just started believing in him again, but now doubt was creeping back in. A web of lies. But Linda wasn't done. She needed to completely poison Helen's mind. "You know what hurts the most?" Linda continued. "I heard he's been with other women too. He always pretends to be something he's not. I don't want you to get hurt, Helen." Helen sat in silence, her heart pounding. "You deserve better," Linda pressed on. "I just hope you realize it before it's too late." Helen swallowed hard. I need to go." Linda smiled in satisfaction. "Of course. Take care of yourself, okay?" As Helen ended the call, she stared at the wall, her emotions now in turmoil once again. "And Linda, She leaned back in her chair, victorious. Let's see how Frank gets out of this one. The truth revealed. The final meeting, determined to put an end to the confusion, Mary arranged a final meeting between Helen and Frank. It was the last chance to clear the air, to bring the truth to light, and to let Helen make a decision with all the facts. Helen arrived at Mary's office, her heart still heavy with doubt. As she stepped in, she was surprised to see not just Mary and her mother, but an elderly man sitting beside Frank. Mary stood and gestured toward the older man. Helen, this is Pa Kamara, Frank's uncle, she said. Helen turned to Frank's uncle, puzzled. Why was he here? Pa Kamara stood up, his eyes filled with warmth and an emotion that Helen couldn't quite place. Then he took her hands gently in his. Helen, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I knew your father. Helen gasped. You knew my father? Yes, Pa Kamara nodded. And not just that, your father saved my life. Helen's breath hitched. Her father had passed away when she was young, and though she cherished his memory, she never imagined that his past actions would come back in such a way. Pa Kamara continued, his voice deep with gratitude. A debt that could never be repaid. 20 years ago, Pa Kamara began, I worked for a company in Freetown. I was a dedicated employee, but one day a powerful man in the company decided he wanted me gone. I was framed for theft. Money had gone missing, and though I was innocent, all the evidence pointed to me. I was on the verge of losing everything. My job, my reputation, even my freedom. No one wanted to stand up for me because the man who framed me had power and influence. But then, your father, Samuel Cole, stepped in. Helen's eyes widened, and she tightened her grip on Pa Kamara's hands. He risked his own job and reputation to prove my innocence, Pa Kamara said. He gathered evidence, stood by me, and fought against the man who wanted to destroy me. And because of him, justice was served. If not for him, I wouldn't be where I am today. I owe him my career, I owe him my stability, I owe him my life. Tears streamed down Helen's face as she listened. Pa Kamara looked deep into her eyes. And now here I am standing before you, the daughter of the man who saved me, the woman my nephew loves. Helen covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the revelation. It felt as if, even in death, her father was still guiding her. Pa Kamara continued with wisdom in his voice. I've lived long enough to know that love is tested in ways we cannot predict. Sometimes we must look beyond the surface to see the truth. Your father did that for me, and now I urge you to do the same for Frank. Frank's raw truth. Frank finally spoke, his voice filled with emotion. I didn't lie to hurt you, Helen, he said, stepping closer. I only wanted to find someone who would love me for me, not my wealth, and I found that in you. Helen looked up at him, her heart pounding. Could she really trust him again? Frank's voice broke. The thought of losing you has been torture, but I understand why you were hurt. I just need you to know that my feelings for you are real. Helen's walls began to crumble. Mary exposes Linda's lies. But before Helen could respond, Mary cleared her throat and spoke firmly. Helen, she said, there's something you need to know. Linda has been lying to you. Helen blinked in confusion. What? She told you that Frank deceives women, that he used her and abandoned her. But the truth is, Linda was the one who deceived Frank. She played him, used him, took his money, and betrayed him. She's the one who broke his heart. Helen staggered back, her mind reeling. She's trying to ruin your happiness because she can't stand to see Frank with someone else, Mary continued. Helen gasped. Linda had manipulated her. The realization hit her like a storm. She had almost lost the love of her life because of a bitter woman's jealousy. A wedding and a new beginning, a celebration of love. 7 months had passed since Helen and Frank's tumultuous journey to love, and now they stood side by side facing the altar, ready to be bound together forever. The wedding was nothing short of spectacular, a grand celebration uniting two worlds. Held in a luxurious venue in Freetown, it was attended by friends, family, and dignitaries from both Sierra Leone and Switzerland. Helen's mother sat in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched her only daughter step into a new chapter of her life. Mama Agnes, Helen's mentor, beamed with pride, knowing that her advice had helped guide Helen to this moment. And in the midst of it all, Pa Kamara stood tall, watching his nephew marry the daughter of the man who had once saved his life. He had never believed in fate before, but today he did. As the officiant spoke the sacred vows, Helen's hands trembled in Frank's. I, Helen Cole, take you, Frank Kamara, to be my lawfully wedded husband. Frank squeezed her fingers gently, his eyes filled with emotion. I, Frank Kamara, take you, Helen Kamara, to be my lawfully wedded wife. The crowd erupted in applause as the couple sealed their vows with a kiss, marking the beginning of their forever. Linda's defeat and the weight of regret. But not everyone at the wedding celebrated with a joyful heart. From a distance hidden behind a pillar, Linda watched the festivities with burning envy. Dressed in an outfit far less glamorous than she was used to, she clutched a glass of wine in one hand, her nails digging into her palm. She had lost. The man she once had in the palm of her hands was now promising his life to another woman. And not just any woman, Helen, the one she had underestimated. She thought her lies, manipulations, and schemes would be enough to break Helen's spirit, to make Frank give up on her. But she had been wrong. As she watched Helen and Frank dance, the reality sank in. She had ruined her own chances. And now there was nothing she could do to change the past. Or was there? A farewell and a promise. Later that evening, Helen and Frank stood before their loved ones preparing to leave for Switzerland. Helen's mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've made me so proud, my daughter. Go and be happy." Mama Agnes blessed them with warm words. Marriage is like a garden. Nurture it, protect it, and let it grow with love and patience. Pa Kamara patted Frank on the shoulder. Make sure you cherish her, my boy. She's more precious than gold. As Helen and Frank made their way to the airport, hand in hand, hearts full of hope, Helen leaned in and whispered to him, "I almost lost you." Frank smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Love always finds its way back. But just as they were about to board the plane, Frank's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen. His expression darkened instantly. Helen frowned, sensing the change in his demeanor. "What is it?" Frank exhaled, looking at her, his eyes now filled with concern. "It's Linda." Helen's heart skipped a beat. "Linda?" Frank nodded, his grip tightening around the phone. "And she's not done with us yet." What is Linda up to? What is next in her plan? Watch out for part 3.